Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear viewers. We received a question in our Fatwa department regarding the ruling on praying Isha during summer months in the UK. So the question reads that I have heard that in the UK, due to persistent twilight during summer months, Isha time doesn't exist and hence Isha time is now estimated. So please provide some clarity and explain if it is permissible to pray Isha with Maghrib, since praying Isha late can sometimes prove difficult for some people. Now, this is a quite common question that people ask, particularly during the summer months time, about Isha time. Now, there has been a lot of a detailed discussion on this. It is a very technical topic and a very complex topic, and there are many Islamic literatures out there on this particular issue, whether they be in Arabic, Urdu, or in English. I have written a detailed article on this, clarifying the issue and the internal debates, which is available on our JKN Fatawa website. But just for simplicity, though, that it is true that persistent twilight, it obscures the Isha time. Now, just for clarity, persistent twilight is basically that after sunset, when the sun when it dips below the horizon, it does not drop below enough for it to be completely dark. So you notice that some of the sun's the glow after sunset, it still remains throughout the whole night, which happens during the summer months, particularly in the UK. So this phenomenon is referred to as persistent twilight because it does not get completely dark. That's what it is. Because of that, the time of Isha is now kind of confusing, because what happens is that after sunset, usually we pray Maghrib Salah, right? And after Maghrib, really usually around about an hour and a half, and so that when the sun during normal times during the year, that it drops below enough that for both of the nautical and astronomical twilight to disappear. And once it gets completely dark, then that's the time when Isha time sets in, according to the accepted position of the Hanafi madhab. But because of the phenomenon persistent twilight, what happens is Maghrib time, it merges within Fajr time, obscuring and confusing the actual time for Isha time. There are times that where in certain parts of the UK that even both the red twilight, so red twilight does not even disappear. Sometimes the red twilight disappears, but the white twilight doesn't disappear, or it disappears extremely late. And then there are times that where the red twilight does not even disappear at all, but rather it is persistent. So because of which, according to all of the madhabs, that Isha time does not actually set in. So what do you do in that particular case then? What's happened? Now, this phenomenon, it usually happens during June time and early July. During June time, early July, which means that outside of these times, Isha time does technically exist, but it may enter quite late. It may enter quite late. But during June time, June solstice, and the early July, the first few weeks of July and so, this is the period of complexity, that where Isha times is now obscured, where many times, many parts of the UK, that the red twilight does not even disappear. So entry of Isha therefore is not certain. Hence, what ulamas have done, what scholars have done, they've resorted to estimation. They've estimated the time, which is why that you find many masajids on their timetable, they have different timings for Isha Salah. So for instance, some basically have adopted the nisful layl principle, i.e. that they wait till the first half of the night to end, and then just before the second half of the night enters, meaning just before Fajr time, they'll read about Isha time about 10-15 minutes before the start time of Fajr. Some have adopted the 1/7 rule, which means that the first 7, they divided the night from sunset to sunrise. They've divided the entire night into 7 parts, and the first portion for Maghrib, and then the second 7th of the night, which is the second portion of the seventh night, they will pray Isha namaz up until the start time of Fajr. And some have arbitrarily fixed the 1 hour rule. They've just arbitrarily fixed 1 hour rule just to create ease for people. And some have just fixed 11 o'clock. Some have fixed 11 o'clock, that during persistent twilight, we're going to fix 11 o'clock as the mark for Isha, to pray Isha Salah. However, some have allowed, but this is just a minority view, that some Hanafi scholars are allowed praying Isha early with Maghrib with a brief interlude, which means we give a short break. In other words, you pray Maghrib namaz, and then you just wait for a few minutes to pray your sunnahs and nawafil. After that, and you can pray Isha namaz. But this is not a predominant position, but it is a minority position amongst certain Hanafi ulamas. Now, my suggestion is that if you are not an expert in the field, neither have you done any extensive research on this, then I would simply suggest is follow your local masjid's timetable, as that is what Islam requires you to do. what your responsibility is, that whichever masjid that you pray your salah in, you just follow the local masjid's timetable, and then that's it. And that's the minimum requirement for Islam, what Islam requires from you. If, however, you have done extensive research in the field yourself, you are aware of the classical and contemporary debates on this particular issue, you have spoken to numerous ulamas and scholars on this, then you can follow whichever scholar's position that is appealing to you or you are inclined towards. That's only if you have done your own extensive research. So essentially what you're doing is you are following a trusted scholar's position that you are inclined towards or you agree to. So this is generally the general advice I would give. Now, regarding combining or praying Isha early, combining Isha early, with Maghrib, or praying Isha early, then I generally recommend, as mentioned, lay people to follow their own local masjid timetable or a scholar's position you agree with if you're an expert or if you're experienced in this field. Praying Isha early with Maghrib is allowed, meaning either combining it or praying Isha with Maghrib with a brief interval, with a brief break. I would recommend that this is only allowed for those who are genuinely struggling to pray Isha late. Yes, so depending on person's particular circumstances. So it's not something which I give a general allowance to everyone, because everybody's circumstances may be different, and there's also a possibility of people abusing this ruling too. So praying Isha namaz early with Maghrib will be only allowed for those generally struggling to pray Isha late. But you do it in a manner that where you pray in a manner where there's a brief break, there's a short interlude, there's a short break in between, enough for you to pray your sunnah and nawafil prayers. Roughly, just by estimation, I would recommend about between 20 to 30 minutes. So start time of Maghrib, you pray your Maghrib namaz, you pray your sunnahs and nawafil and awabin, wait for 20 minutes from the start time of Maghrib, or 30 minutes, and then after that you pray your Isha namaz. Okay, so this is not 20 or 30 minutes after you prayed your Maghrib namaz, but rather 20 to 30 minutes after the start time of Maghrib. So you pray, so that 20 or 30 minutes just gives enough for you to pray your Maghrib namaz, read your sunnahs or read your nawafils, and then take a short break for your tasbih or any of the different adhkars that you read, and then just pray your Isha namaz after that. So 20 to 30 minutes I would recommend as a precaution. And actual combining, however, this is my recommendation. Now, actual combining, however, many ulamas and scholars have allowed this, but then it's the question that because the Hanafi madhab does not prescribe combining salahs, because in the Hanafi madhab, combining two salahs together in one single time is not permissible. It is permissible in the other three madhabs, but in the Hanafi madhab, there's no prescriptions for it. So therefore, if somebody wants to follow the position of those scholars of the permissibility of combining Maghrib and Isha together, then you have to follow the conditions according to the madhabs that allow it. Okay, it's not something you can decide arbitrarily that, okay, I'm just going to combine Isha with Maghrib and I'm going to do Jama bain salatain. Because if you're going to do that, then you have to follow the condition, the criteria according to the madhabs that allow it. Because the Hanafi madhab doesn't have any provision for this, right? And even Ibn Abidin al-Shami, rahmatullahi alayhi, who was a famous Hanafi jurist, even in his book that he mentions, in his Radd al-Muhtar, he mentions that combining the salahs will be allowed in the case of necessity, whilst following the conditions of the imams of those madhabs. Okay, so if you are not familiar with the conditions of Jama bain salatin according to the madhab, then it's best to refrain from it altogether. Which is why I recommend is praying Isha early with Maghrib with a brief interlude, because you're not actually combining salah. Okay, only for those who are genuinely struggling. So irrespective, that even if you pray your Isha early with Maghrib, then there are two conditions I would suggest regarding this. Number one is that the concession only applies when the Isha time is estimated, when it doesn't exist, and that is during June time and mid-July. This concession does not apply outside of this time, because Isha time technically does exist. It does exist. It does only exist. It has to be prayed a little bit later. But during the time that when Isha time does not exist and is purely estimated, which is during June time or mid-July, then this concession is only applied there. And that's the first one. And number two, it has to be a genuine struggle. For example, extreme fatigue, for instance, or for instance, someone's suffering from severe illness, or for example, young children or women women who are exhausted with their domestic chores, and for them to pray Isha late will be very difficult for them. For them, there could be this concession. And for young children, particularly for those women who have to look after children as well. They got newborns, for example, or infants. It can get very exhausting, very difficult for them. So therefore, I would suggest that this concession is restricted to these people only. Otherwise, if this general struggle necessity does not apply to you, then you should pray your Isha Salah according to the local masjid timetable. So I hope this video provided sufficient clarity, and I hope it benefited you as a viewer. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for Sadaqah Jariyah. And remember in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.